Alright, it's about time we take a look at the new Mesmer rifle, which despite some shortcomings is a pretty decent weapon to farm with in the open world. Except for Rifle 5, all skills deal surprising amounts of damage. Detonating Inspiring Imagery while landing Journey, which are Rifle 3 and 2 respectively, is enough to one-shot most enemies. Our Phantasmal Sharpshooter will take out chunks of HP by themselves, and we get 2 of those, or even 3 with Signet of the Ether. Having the ability to quickly delete enemies combines really well with Virtuoso, as we won't be reliant on our target staying alive to get the most out of our clones. Instead, we can use the Bladesongs skills to take care of even more enemies while we wait for our rifle skills to recharge. So we're gonna want to pick up any trait that increases our burst damage, which the domination trait line has plenty of. Interrupting, dazing or stunning a foe, which can be done with both Bladesong Dissonance and the Phantasmal Sharpshooter, will inflict stacks of vulnerability and will deal half a percentage of extra damage per stack on our target. The major traits will enable both us and our illusions to deal extra strike damage, and strip 2 boons every time we crowd control an enemy, which will help with those in later expansions or when we're farming rifts. In the footage, I picked Dueling as my second trait line, which helps critical hits deal even more damage against disabled foes, as well as those that are lower than 50% HP, and grants our Phantasms Fury so that they are guaranteed to land critical hits as well. If you're constantly struggling to stay alive, however, it might be worth swapping Dueling for Inspiration, which will let your Phantasms take over conditions and heal you when they're summoned, as well as when you shatter them. As mentioned at the start, our elite spec of choice is the Virtuoso, who summons blades instead of clones, and one of their advantages is that our target won't need to stay alive, which makes it much easier to swap enemies in the open world. Our minor traits will further help inflict vulnerability and increase the critical hit chance we get from Fury, as well as increasing our ferocity based on our vitality. This synergizes really well with Marauders gear, which I tend to run on power builds whenever I'm solo, and our major traits will increase our damage even further and help us stock blades as long as we're in combat. I've already mentioned Marauders gear, which works pretty well with the usual Scholar and Dragon Hunter runes. Although if you want a cheaper alternative, I'd suggest you take a look at Runes of the Worm. Sigils of Force and Impact will further help increase our burst damage, although you could swap Impact for Sigil of Blood, which will let you steal health when landing a critical hit. Sustain is probably the biggest shortcoming of this build. Signet of the Ether can help somewhat in this department, but combining a Sigil of Blood with slices of Candy Dragon rolls, which are fairly cheap on the trading post, might be something you want to consider. In the footage, I'm using Relic of Speed, which is my preferred relic whenever I'm farming and I don't have access to super speed. If you'd rather deal more damage, Relic of the Thief is a viable alternative, or something like Relic of Duena could maybe help you stay alive longer. None of the utilities are mandatory. I generally like Signet of the Ether for both its passive and active heal, as well as its ability to grant me an extra Phantasm. Rain of Swords is a solid damage option which inflicts even more vulnerability, but might be inconvenient at times if your enemy is moving too much. Blink is there to get around faster, as well as break out of stuns, and Signet of Illusions helps stock up on blades faster and will recharge shatter skills whenever it's used. Thousand Cuts is the only elite skill that deals damage, but it's pretty amazing at doing so. Since the rifle is primarily a support weapon, I tend to use Jadebot protocols to get access to every boon, which makes an elite like Time Warp less appealing to me. The playstyle itself is fairly straightforward, but you will want to make sure you know exactly what each skill does. Both Rifle 2 and 3 deal significant amount of damage, but because Rifle 3 needs to be placed before it can be detonated, you will want to use that one first. Rifle 4 or Sharpshooter deals decent damage, can stun enemies and inflict tons of vulnerability. When facing multiple enemies, make sure you target veterans and elites with this skill, and if you happen to run out of charges, use your Signet of Ether to instantly get another one. Every time you stock up on 5 blades, you'll want to use one of the Bladesongs. Harmony is our main nuke, and while part of Sorrow's damage are conditions, do not underestimate just how hard this skill can hit. Dissonance should be at the bottom of the priority list when it comes to dealing damage, but if you need to crowd control an enemy or strip boons, you'll want to prioritize it instead. And Distortion basically turns you immune to any damage for a short time, which can help avoid attacks or even some mechanics. And Virtuoso's 5th ability is Blade Turn Requiem, for which you will need to be in melee range. It can still be worth using, but most enemies should be dead by the time you get to them. And that's basically it. Comments and questions down below or on Discord, and like and subscribe.